Hey, welcome back to the podcast, and I'm glad you're here. If you were with us on Sunday, you heard the sermon on Stay Connected. The idea that fruitfulness in the Christian life isn't really about trying harder, it's about staying close to the shepherd. We covered a lot of ground: Ezekiel 34, Psalm 23, and John 10. We hit the major themes, and I think it landed pretty well. But there was a lot I left on the table. Good stuff, I think, the kind of material that's too rich for a Sunday morning where we're also singing hymns and reading announcements and trying not to run over the potluck or whatever else is going on. So that's what this is. Think of this as Sunday's conversation continued. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to slow down on a few things I had to rush past. We're going to spend some real time in the background of these texts. Because I think when you understand what Ezekiel was actually writing into and what John was actually doing with those I am statements, it changes the way these passages hit. And then we'll talk about what any of this means Monday through Saturday. So get comfortable. This is for the folks who like to go a little deeper. Let's do it. Okay, so here's something I didn't have time to really dig into on Sunday. When Ezekiel writes chapter 34, he is not writing from Jerusalem. He's writing from Babylon. Ezekiel was a priest. He'd been one of the first wave of Israelites carried into exile, 597 BCE, about 10 years before Jerusalem finally fell and the temple was destroyed. So when he writes, the worst hasn't even happened yet, and his community is sitting in Babylon asking the question that I think a lot of people ask in their worst seasons. Has God abandoned us? That's the context. That's who is reading this. That's the weight of what chapter 34 is landing into. On Sunday, I mentioned briefly that the chapter opens with God's fury at Israel's leaders, the shepherds who failed the flock. I said, don't belabor it, get to the promise quickly. And I still think that's right for a sermon, but I want to linger here for a moment because the tenderness of what comes next only lands if you feel the weight of what came first. The kings and priests and leaders of Israel had been feeding themselves. They took the wool, they took the meat, but when the sheep were sick, nobody tended them. When they were injured, nobody bound them up. When they wandered off, nobody went looking. The flock was scattered, and the people who were supposed to care were completely absent. I think most of us at some point have experienced that kind of spiritual leadership. Maybe it was a church that let you down. Maybe it was a pastor who wasn't actually paying attention. Maybe it was a season where you went to the people who were supposed to have answers and came away emptier than you started. Ezekiel's audience knew that feeling intimately. They'd lived it. And then, verse 11. After all of that, after the indictment, after the grief and the fury, God says, "For thus says the Lord God, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out." Now, I spent some time this Sunday, but I want to give you a little more. The phrase I myself in Hebrew, it's ani ani. It's doubled for emphasis. There's really no English equivalent that captures it. It's like God is putting his fist on the table. Enough with the failed intermediaries. Enough with the shepherds who won't do their job. I am going personally. And then the verbs in verses 11 through 16. I counted them on Sunday, remember? Search, rescue, bring out, feed, make to lie down, bind up, strengthen. Every single one has God as the subject. The sheep are not performing. The sheep are not earning their way back. The sheep are simply the objects of God's action. God is doing all of it. Here's what I think that means for anyone sitting in a season that feels like exile. The question is not, how do I get back to God? The question is, will I stop running from the shepherd who is already running toward me? That is a completely different question, and it's a lot less exhausting. Now, and this I mentioned but went past quickly, Ezekiel 34:23 says, God will set up one shepherd, my servant David, over the flock. That's just 2 verses outside of our reading on Sunday. And for the early Christian community, when they heard Jesus say, I am the Good Shepherd in John 10, they heard that as the fulfillment of exactly this promise. The divine shepherd God promised in Ezekiel has arrived. His name is Jesus. When John records Jesus saying, I am the Good Shepherd, he is making a direct claim to be the fulfillment of what Ezekiel was pointing toward. That connection between Ezekiel 34 and John 10 is not an accident. It is theology, carefully constructed, and once you see it, the two texts read each other. Ezekiel announces the promise. John 10 says, here he is. I mentioned Sunday that I am the Good Shepherd is one of 7 I am statements in John's Gospel. So let me give you the whole list because I think it's worth sitting with. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the Good Shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. 7 of them. And they are not random. John is doing something very deliberate. Because in Exodus 3, when Moses asks God's name at the burning bush, God says, I am who I am, the divine name. In Hebrew, Yahweh, the name so sacred that faithful Jews would not speak it aloud. So when John records Jesus saying, I am, over and over again, with these great predicates attached, he is making a sustained theological claim. Jesus is not just describing himself. He is identifying himself. Every I am in John is an echo of the burning bush. Every one of them is a claim to divine identity. The Greek word translated good in I am the Good Shepherd is kalos, and it's a rich word. It doesn't just mean morally good as opposed to morally bad. It means beautiful, noble, ideal, excellent. This is the shepherd who is everything a shepherd was meant to be. The true shepherd, the complete shepherd, the shepherd who fulfills the whole purpose of the role. So when Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd, he's not just saying he's a good guy. He's saying, I am the one Ezekiel promised. I am the one the shepherds of Israel failed to be. I am the fulfillment, the ideal, the real thing. I want to spend a minute on verses 14 and 15 because I think they're the most quietly remarkable thing in the whole passage. Jesus says, I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. That comparison, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, that is, if you stop and really hear it, a staggering claim. The knowledge between Father and Son within the Trinity is the deepest intimacy that exists in the universe. And Jesus says that is the model for his relationship with his people. You are not a project he is managing. You are not a problem he is solving. You are not a performance he is grading. You are known. The same kind of known that exists at the heart of the Trinity. That's who Jesus says you are to him. And this is the pastoral center of the whole passage. Most of the striving and exhaustion and performance anxiety in the Christian life comes from people who, somewhere underneath it all, are not quite sure they're truly loved. So they work for it. They earn toward it. They produce and hope that eventually it will be enough. The Good Shepherd says, it's already enough. I already laid down my life. That's settled. The only question left is whether you'll stay close enough to let that love actually nourish you. Let me try something with you. I want you to try it just for the next few minutes to hear Psalm 23 as if it's the first time you're ever hearing these words. Because if you grew up in church, and many of you did, you've heard it so many times at funerals and services that it's almost like wallpaper. You see it, but you don't really look at it anymore. Here's the reframe I find helpful. David is a former shepherd. He spent his early years as a boy watching actual sheep in the hill country of Judah. When he wrote this psalm, he's not thinking or writing theologically from a library. He's writing from inside of an experience he knows firsthand. He knows what a good shepherd does because he was one. So when he describes the shepherd's action, he's working from real knowledge, and the details matter. I said on Sunday that sheep won't lie down unless 4 conditions are met. Let me actually walk through those because I think they matter more than I had time to explain then. Sheep won't lie down if they're hungry. Obviously, you don't rest when you're still searching for food. They won't lie down if they're in conflict with other sheep. The social dynamics of a flock are real, and tension keeps them on their feet. They won't lie down if they're being bothered by parasites, flies, ticks, the things that irritate and distract. And most importantly, they won't lie down if they sense a threat nearby. Fear keeps them standing and alert. So when David writes, "He makes me lie down in green pastures," what he's describing is a shepherd who has addressed all 4 of those things. The sheep is fed, the conflict in the flock has been managed, the pests have been dealt with, and the sheep feels safe enough to actually rest. The sheep's peace is entirely a product of the shepherd's work. The sheep didn't manufacture its own calm. The shepherd created the conditions. That is the picture of abiding. You don't manage your own spiritual anxiety into stillness. You get close enough to the shepherd that he addresses the things that are keeping you on your feet. There's something that I find genuinely moving in this psalm too. I mean, many people do, but when we really look down at this, when we look at how David refers to the shepherd in verses 1 through 3, verses in verse 4. Verses 1 to 3, he makes me lie down. He leads me. He restores my soul. Third person, the shepherd is being described almost as a subject of study. Then verse 4 arrives. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod, your staff, they comfort me. Second person, the moment the valley appears, the distance between David and the shepherd collapses completely. He stops describing the shepherd and starts talking to him. Crisis drives intimacy. I think that this is one of the most honest things in all of Scripture about how faith actually works. Most of us are pretty comfortable keeping God at a slight remove when life is okay. He is good, he provides, he leads. Third person, objective, a bit arm's length. And then the darkness comes, and suddenly it is you, not he, you right here with me. If you are in a dark valley right now, if something is hard in a way that isn't resolving, I want you to notice that. The psalm isn't surprised by that shift. It expects it. And it promises that the darkness is exactly where the shepherd draws closest. I landed on this on Sunday, but I want to say it again because I think it's the thread that ties the whole series together. My cup overflows, not full, overflowing. That is the normal condition of life near the shepherd. Not barely enough, overflow. And overflow is what produces generosity, what produces patience, what produces the fruit of the Spirit we're going to be talking about next Sunday. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't bear fruit from a severed branch. The conditions for fruitfulness are not more effort, they're proximity. When you feel depleted, when you feel like you have nothing left to give, nothing left to offer, no patience left, no kindness left, that is almost never a sign that you need to try harder. But it is almost always a sign that you have been away from the shepherd. The cup is empty because you haven't been near the source. The worship plan for this Sunday included John 15, 1 through 11, alongside the John 10 passage. We didn't preach directly out of John 15. I've been coming back to it throughout the series, but I want to spend a moment there because it gives us a word that the John 10 passage didn't use: abide. In Greek, it's meno. It means to remain, to stay, to dwell. This is not a visit, this is a residence. Jesus uses that word 11 times in John 15, 1 through 11. 11 times in 11 verses. That's not accidental repetition. That's emphasis. He wants to make sure the disciples and us understand what he's describing is not occasional closeness. It is sustained, settled, habitual proximity. The branch doesn't just visit the vine, it lives there. And the fruitfulness that comes from that connection is not a seasonal event. It's the ongoing result of a life that doesn't leave. The worship plan also listed Jeremiah 17, 7 through 8, and I want to read it to you because it's one of my favorites in the whole Bible. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. A tree planted by water. Not a tree that hauls water from far away. Not a tree that has to work to irrigate itself. A tree that was planted in exactly the right place, right next to the source, so that the water just comes. The roots find it. The tree doesn't strain for it. That's the life Jesus is describing. Not a life of spiritual effort and self-supply, a life positioned near the source so that the nourishment is just there. The worship plan also included 1 John 4, verses 7 through 12. This passage is the one where John basically distills the whole gospel into a few sentences. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. God is love. Here's why that connects to this week's theme. The reason the Good Shepherd can be described with the kind of intimacy we see in John 10, knowing his sheep, being known by them, laying down his life, is because love is not just something God does, it's something God is. The shepherd's goodness isn't a policy, it's his nature. And when we abide in him, we are abiding in love itself. That is what overflows into the cup, not a technique, love, flowing from its source. Okay, that's where I'll leave it today. We covered the Ezekiel background, the exile context, the Ani, the shepherds who failed. We talked about what John's I am statements are actually doing, John's I am statements are actually doing theology. We slowed down on Psalm 23, the sheep that won't lie down, the pronoun shift in verse 4, the overflow principle. And we picked up a few threads from the worship plan that didn't make it into Sunday's sermon. If you took one thing from this episode, I hope it's this. The shepherd came looking. Ezekiel announced it. John shows us its fulfillment. And Psalm 23 shows us what life looks like when you stay near the one who found you. You don't have to manufacture your way back. You just have to stop running. This coming Sunday, we're going to talk about the fruit of the Spirit from Galatians 5 and how the works versus fruit distinction works. What it actually looks like when the Spirit is doing the growing instead of you. And the week after that is Palm Sunday. We'll be right up against Holy Week. Thanks for listening. Come back next week and I'll see you there.